Welcome to the Black Sparrow Media Internet Broadcast Network.
You are listening to Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a podcast about Linux, open source, and amateur radio, for everyone. Now here are your hosts, Cheryl, W5MOO, Russ, K5TUX, and Bill, NE4RD.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome. You have tuned in to episode number 582 of Linux in the Ham Shack, the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet. And tonight you have joined us for our deep dive episode. We apologize for the 1 week delay in getting this out, but life gets in the way and things happen, and it is what it is. But we are back to take a deep dive, although this is going to be a little bit different. We don't have like a single topic to talk about, I guess, but it should be informative anyway. This was generated out of some email feedback we got a little while ago, about a month ago, I think. I could actually check dates and stuff, but what's the fun in that? So anyway, before we go ahead and bring our guest on, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves as we normally do. For the On Assignment, Cheryl, W5MOO. I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD.
All right, and I guess we'll just preemptively bring on our guest for tonight. He sent us an email a while back. I think we discussed addressing this email at some point in the past. Whether I read it or not, or just talked about it, I don't recall. But this is the author of said email, and we are going to talk a little bit about what was in that email, his response to it, and then talk a little bit about the organization that he does some work for. So let's bring him on here and have him introduce himself. This is Justin Alpha Bravo 3 Echo, Justin Overfelt. So how's it going tonight?
Yeah, hi Russ and everybody else. I'm Justin AB3E. Just a little bit about myself. Been a ham since 2019. Been a software developer for longer than that, and kind of got into ham radio through playing around with SDRs, and I've enjoyed digital mode since the beginning, and also been enjoying CW of late, which maybe is the original digital mode. I don't know, that might be a hot take, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, I mean, CW is basically on and off, so I guess you could call it digital for sure. It's just the length of the ons and the offs. I guess that makes it trinary, I guess. So you have on, off, and
spacing.
Spacing, yeah, exactly. So, all right, well, very good. So thanks for being here, Justin. Let's jump back a little bit to the email that you sent us. This was in regards to an episode we did. It was a short topics episode where we discussed some news topics, and you weighed in on a couple of those topics, and I need to get back to my email here. Here it is. So the first one was about the ORI 219 filing, about the 220 megahertz band, and apparently we had some, not surprisingly, misinformation about this filing in the take that we had on it, and you apparently set us straight. So rather than have me just read the email, I'll have you sort of encapsulate what we got wrong about the 220 megahertz band and the changes that were being bandied about. Yeah,
so I don't know that you guys were that far off on 219. Because there was really two topics, as I recall, and that I keyed in on, and both of them were really about this kind of proceeding that the FCC put forward, and I guess it's easiest to talk about that first. It was earlier this year, and the FCC put out a call. It's not really a notice of proposed rulemaking. It was just like a notice that said, please, respond to this notice and tell us about regulations that we could delete. And it was called delete, delete, delete. That's literally what it was called, which kind of interesting. But so this engendered all sorts of responses from all sorts of various parties, amateur and otherwise. Sort of turned into a bit of a suggestion box. And as I understand it, and I was sort of new to this regulatory stuff, I had never commented on an FCC proceeding prior to this, and I kind of learned as I was going along, I guess, and read what other people did. You had people responding to this, everything from the National Association of Broadcasters about various over-the-air TV rules to low-power FM stations. Really, anyone that had any kind of interest and was wanting to change some FCC rules. I think quite a few of them didn't really stick with the delete spirit. Quite a few of them propose rather far-reaching changes and additions to regulations. But it was all over the map, and it's all public record. Anybody can go read it, what various people proposed. What we expect will happen is that the FCC will read all these, and they will open rulemaking procedures for things they deem interesting, and then there'll be further comments on each of those rulemaking procedures. So they probably won't be doing anything specifically off this. But anyway, I don't want to go too deep into that right now. But so really, the filing that the organization that I was helping out with, and that's Open Research Institute, they're sort of a nonprofit organization well, I'll just read from the site. It says that ORI is a nonprofit research and development organization which provides all its work to the general public under the principles of open source and open access research. So probably fits pretty well for the kind of listeners of this podcast. But they do all sorts of things. There's some stuff that's highly technical. They participated in a successful I guess you would call it Venus bounce, like moon bounce. It was a transmission from Earth, Venus, Earth. Very interesting. And all the various link budgets and things that they had to do for that. That's just one example. But another thing they do is some of this regulatory work and like looking at some of the rules and seeing how they could be modernized. And I had seen a presentation by the CEO of ORI, Michelle W5NYV, and she it was sort of an interesting presentation. It was given in about I think it was around October of last year, and it was themed for Halloween, and it was called The Haunted Band, and it was about 219 to 220 megahertz, which is a secondary allocation that amateurs have in the U.S. and Canada, I believe, but definitely in the U.S. And it has some very strange rules in Part 97 if you read through it. And that was kind of what you guys talked about that a little bit in the ORI filing for that. And we sort of keyed in on that and used this delete petition to try and push forward some changes to this. And so that was one piece of it. And then the other piece that was in there that I mentioned is there was some stuff in there that I think you guys called it like FCC proposed shakeup. And it was sort of a wide-ranging like change of various amateur things. That was really one person. His name was Michael Adams. I don't know him or have any affiliation. Where he was just responding to this delete petition, just like ORI and ARRL and many other people did. And he was just suggesting some things that he thought would be interesting. So that was really all that was. It was just one filing in there, and a lot of people suggested a lot of things. So whether the FCC will act on stuff, who can say? But as I said in the email, you can really, as I learned, petition the FCC for anything you want. In reality, I mean, they may not do anything with it or may deny, but theoretically it will be read and your voice will be heard. So anyway, that's kind of it in a nutshell. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long there.
No, not at all. That's a good encapsulation of it. So what was your, I don't think we talked about the filing itself. So you obviously had the ability to respond to the filing and our sort of potential misrepresentation of other people's response to the filing. So can you summarize what the filing actually was? I know it was a proposed rulemaking, but what was it for specifically? The FCC side.
Do you mean ORI's filing or the FCC's delete thing?
The FCC's one. You can go into ORI's if you want as well, but
yeah. So the FCC was really just putting out a notice to the public, just saying, hey, it was relatively short. It just said, hey, please respond to this filing, and you can do that online or through the mail or even in person. I think you can deliver things, but most people just do it online, and they have this thing called the ECFS. What that stands for is escaping me right now, but it's basically the online system for when they put out these notices or proposed rulemakings. You can go in and comment. Anybody can do it. Organizations, individuals. So you can go on there and comment, and they just did that for this, and they just opened up comments, and usually you get a month for comments, and then there's another month for reply comments, which are basically comments on the comments, is the easiest way to describe it. So ARRL frequently responds to this kind of thing. They had put something out, maybe it was 2 years ago now. They wanted to reconfigure the 60-meter band and make some changes, and ARRL responded to that. I think they put out some communications on that. ARRL responded to this notice as well, and they had some, I think, pretty good ideas about what could possibly be deleted from the regulations. And they obviously focused on Part 97, the amateur regulations, because that's their charter. And yeah, so this was really just a general. It was sort of a strange notice, as I've learned in FCC, where, like I said, it wasn't a notice of proposed rulemaking where they're saying they're actually going to change some rules. It was really just, hey, let us know what things we should delete. So that's really all it was, and the public had a chance to comment, and the public certainly did. There was lots of comments, well over 1,000 comments on this from organizations and people, and like I said, it ran the gamut. I mean, it was in no way specific to amateur radio. It covered all sorts of things, so it was interesting reading the comments and seeing what people wanted to change. And so, yeah, and ORI focused specifically on this 219 to 220. As I said, as Michelle referred to it as the haunted band. It's an odd one. And if you look into it a little bit, and I got to say, before seeing this presentation and getting interested in it, I had no idea that what these rules were. I had never operated on this segment that we have, and if you look at even the ARRL like band charts that they put out, some of them have this listed and some of them don't. Some of the older ones definitely do, and you can see in there it's like a different color than the other things because it has all these strange restrictions. And I can get into more of that if you want now, or I don't know if you want to say anything else, and based on my discussion of what that delete thing actually was.
Yeah, let me just jump in here for a second. I did go to the filing itself through the whatever you call it, the ECFS there. And if you look at what's proposed in the filing, because they have one version where you can download a PDF with the markup in it, so you can see like what they were proposing, deleting and changing and stuff like that. And it's a monster. There's a lot of red ink in it, and the red. I think the stuff that's in there is like the red. And the strike through is stuff that needs to be like either amended or removed, I think was the idea behind it. And of course it's Part 97, so it's lengthy and ridiculous anyway. But so before you get into talking a little bit about the 219 and some of the weird things about it, what I'm kind of curious, like how you got involved in it as far as ORI is concerned. Like, what's your involvement with ORI specifically, or was this just something that was like a one-off because you were interested in it?
Yeah, so I think what you were talking about with the markup and stuff was the kind of that second part where you guys were talking about this proposed changes by this person, Michael Adams. Yeah, he proposed some pretty wide-ranging changes in Part 97, and so yeah, it has all those the PDF of various things that he was interested in changing, simplifying the license structure, some pretty serious changes. And so that was definitely an interesting read. Whether or not anyone will take any action on that, I have no idea. But anyway, in terms of ORI, I really, I guess I had heard of them, but I got involved in this regulatory thing because I had seen this presentation from Michelle, this haunted band presentation. Somebody linked it online. I think I may have seen it in a newsletter that people that listen to this may be interested in. It's called Zero Retries. It's run by Steve NHG&J. And you can Google for it, but it's a very interesting newsletter about technical topics in amateur radio. I think this was linked, and I watched the presentation, and I just got interested in it. And so I reached out to Michelle and another guy that helped out with this, Mike McGinty, whose call sign is escaping me now. But I just reached out, and they said, "Yeah, well, would you like to help on this?" I said, "Sure." And so we ended up meeting and discussing what we thought we wanted to propose, and we basically wrote it up and then sent it into the FCC by the deadline, and that was that. And then we wrote some reply comments after that in reply to some comments some other people had filed. So yeah, I haven't had a huge amount of haven't done a huge amount of work with ORI other than this, but it's easy to kind of become I guess you would call it become a member. It's really like joining their Slack and then figuring out what projects that they work on that might be interesting to you. And there's a whole bunch of different things that they do. So yeah, I could see myself collaborating in other ways, but yeah, I was just interested and reached out, and they immediately kind of pulled me in and gave me something to do. So that was pretty much it.
It's like contributing to open source. It's amazing how that works.
Yes.
Well, before we launch into asking you about the 219 megahertz band and what you know about it and what you find interesting about it that sort of drew you into this whole world and got you involved with FCC filings and the ORI and all that, I'm going to ask Bill if he has anything to ask or contribute before we do that.
Of course not.
Of course.
No, I'm interested. This is a great topic. It's definitely one that we sort of coasted over. I believe it was a short topics show where we kind of mentioned a couple of these things in passing. So it's great to get a little bit more context and depth on them.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about this too, because I know that what is 220? Is that the 125 centimeters?
Yeah.
Is that what we figured out? Okay.
1.25 meters.
Meters. Yeah, not centimeters. So I guess we'll just let you run on this because I'm not even sure how to ask questions about it, because this is definitely a part of the amateur radio spectrum that I do not operate on, and apparently you weren't real familiar with it either before you got sort of involved. But is this part of or at least the ORI part of this, is that referencing a part of the band that is sort of in limbo as regards general operation, or is it just part of what 220 is? Or I don't know, maybe you can just sort of flesh it out for us, because I don't even know what to ask really.
Yeah, sounds good. And you guys can jump in anytime. And yeah, and you're completely right. I didn't know too much about this, and I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about not knowing too much about it, because it's it's bizarre in a way. And I think the haunted band theme for Halloween was very apt. So it's it's in that same range. I don't know that I'd consider it part of 1.25 meters, because it's kind of different. We have 222 to 225, and that is in many ways just like 2 meters or 440, in that it has repeaters, and it has the lower part of that, the 222 to 225 segment, is like weak signal and CW, and so it's much like some of the other bands in a lot of ways. And 219 to 220 is very much not like that. So they're close together, but I sort of see them differently, and I think this is why ARRL has tried to show them in different ways on these band charts, and it's a little bit awkward to do. So yeah, I guess I'll start with some of the history, and this is going to be very U.S. specific, so I'm sorry for our international listeners, but that's how it's going to be for this one. So basically, I think you guys know this, but we, at one point in the past, we had 220 to 225, and this was in, I believe, kind of the early 90s. The FCC basically took away 220 to 222 and gave it essentially to UPS, United Parcel Service, who was going to use that I believe, for land mobile communications. And because the land mobile segments that they already had allocated for like business band stuff was rather crowded, and they were going to create this nationwide land mobile for their drivers, I assume, among other things, on this band. And so they, at that time, removed it from the amateur radio service and allocated it to land mobile. And this process took so long that UPS ended up never using it, and they still don't use it to this day. And I believe it's been it's like subleased to other users. I'm not actually sure in that piece, but anyway, at the time that they did this, ARRL petitioned the FCC to give us another part of the band, because at the time this was sort of in the heyday of packet radio, and there was a lot of concern that there were a bunch of kind of packet radio message forwarding backbone links in that section of 220. And there was concern that moving them to 222 to 225 would cause too much congestion in the band. And all of this stuff was done in FCC proceedings, and it's all public record. You can go back and read it. They have everything online, even from back then. And so I read through a bunch of it after looking at this and learned a bunch of this history. And so anyway, the ARRL proposed, well, why don't you give us secondary status on 219 to 220? There was a lot of back and forth. And at the time, the FCC, there was, I think, some other users of that band, but at the time, the FCC was clearing that band for a service that was called AMTS, or the Automated Maritime Telecommunications System. So this was supposed to be a service for, obviously, a waterway service, a maritime service. That was, it's a little unclear what it was supposed to be to me, but because it's not marine VHF, that's a different thing. But I think there was supposed to be some, I don't know, some automated, I don't know if it was data or other things. Anyway, it doesn't matter much because that service never got off the ground either. That was never really widely deployed, but at the time, there was thought that it was going to be. And so when you look at ARRL's petition for the secondary allocation for amateur radio in 219 to 220, it's back and forth with these companies that had bid on and received these AMTS licenses. And some of them were like on the Mississippi River and other places around, generally coast stations, West Coast, East Coast, all over the U.S. And so they went back and forth with the ARRL and the FCC and these proceedings. And what we ended up with was this sort of Byzantine set of rules for how amateurs could use this band. And just to give you a flavor, and this is all in Part 97, it's kind of buried in there. But basically what they came up with was every time an AMTS coast station wanted to get on the LA, anytime an AMTS licensee wanted to use, set up a station and start using their license, they would have to send notification of their transmitter and where the license was going to be, or where the transmitter and license was going to be used, to the ARRL. That's actually in Part 80, which covers the maritime services. And ARRL was supposed to maintain this list of AMTS station licensees. And the reason they were supposed to do that was if you were an amateur station that wanted to operate on 219, you had to go request this database from ARRL with all these station locations from the AMTS, and then basically decide if where you wanted to transmit was between 80 and 670 kilometers from an AMTS station. And if you are, you have to inform any AMTS licensees at least 30 days in advance of operation. If you are 80 kilometers or less, you have to ask permission of the AMTS licensees in order to operate on this band as an amateur. Written permission. Part 97 does not give you any, does not prescribe any method of doing this. It doesn't prescribe hardly anything other than saying that you need to do it. If you are more than 670 kilometers from an AMTS licensee, you don't have to do anything. You can just operate. However, almost no one in the U.S. Is more than 670 kilometers away from an AMTS licensee. That's a really long distance. So, as it turns out, pretty much everybody at least has to notify, if not ask permission. However, since AMTS never got off the ground, the FCC allowed licensees that had bid on and won these licenses to basically lease them out to other people that were going to do things that have nothing to do with maritime services at all. So, for example, some utility companies use this for various like telemetry and SCADA stuff, but it's primarily used in the U.S. by railroads now for positive train control. So basically, train safety related things. So most of the licenses have been bought up by various railroads, including Amtrak, and all sorts of other railroads. So that's kind of the situation now. The other thing is, as far as we can tell, so when Michelle was starting to look into this, she requested the ARRL because in Part 97 it says, as an amateur, if you want to operate on this band, you should request the ARRL. Hey, give me the list of AMTS stations. They do not have a list of AMTS stations. So no AMTS licensee or sub-licensee has ever notified the ARRL, as far as we can tell, about their station locations or characteristics. So that's interesting because it seems to be a violation of of the Part 80 in maritime service. But that doesn't really help us. ARRL said, it's not their fault that nobody notified them. So there's really they were prepared to receive notifications of this and had, I think, a plan in place for a database that would be publicly accessible. So anyhow, that's kind of where we're. So when she reached out to ARRL, they said, well, here's a search you can use in the ULS, the Universal Licensing System of the FCC, to try and search for these licensees and see what their distances are to you. So that turns out to be rather difficult because the stuff in the ULS doesn't necessarily have good addresses, or if they have addresses, it's like the address of the lawyer that handles the license and is not the actual transmitter address or location. And so we're sort of in this situation where on paper we have this band, but in reality you can't actually use it. It's pretty much impossible. We, as far as ARRL knows, because as an amateur you have to submit your transmitter location and characteristics to ARRL so they can make that public for the AMTS licensees. It's essentially a very heavy-handed way of ensuring there won't be interference, and if there is, it could be resolved easily. Because these AMTS licensees are primary on the band, we're secondary. So we must not cause interference, and we must accept interference. So that's kind of some of the history of it. And the other thing is, since, again, at the time when ARRL went to request this from the FCC, they were concerned about packet backbone networks. And so, our power is restricted, I think, to 50 watts or less, maybe. And then it might be 25. I'd have to look again. But
50 watts, yeah.
Yeah. And then also in Part 97, it says use is restricted to amateur stations participating as forwarding stations and fixed point-to-point digital message forwarding systems, including intercity packet backbone networks. It is not available for other purposes. So you might say, what is a digital message forwarding system? That term is defined in Part 97. It's not entirely clear to me what it means. So it's in there. And intercity packet backbone networks are not defined in Part 97. So it's sort of been treated as digital, like point-to-point digital is probably okay. But again, it hasn't mattered because as far as we can tell, and ARRL knows, no one has successfully operated on this band since at least the 90s. And even then, we're not sure exactly what the nature of the operation was in the 90s. They only know that, quote, a group was active on the band in the 90s. So essentially, it's a band that on paper we have a secondary allocation for. In reality, it is not usable. So it's if you read through the history, you can sort of see how we got here. But you know, and I was kind of asking about this regulatory approach because it reads very strangely compared to other parts of Part 97, where it has these very specific requirements that are outlined. Typically, when we're secondary on a band, it just says the normal secondary thing. We must accept interference from primary users, and we must not cause interference to primary users. So the fact that this is so different is odd. And so with all that in mind, essentially in a nutshell, what we proposed was very simple. And that was just that we treat this band like any other secondary allocation, which is to say that we will not cause interference and we will accept interference and delete essentially all the notification requirements on both sides. Delete the notification requirements for AMTS licensees out of Part 80 and delete all of our notification requirements and permission requirements out of Part 97, because the permission requirements are especially an issue because it doesn't say anything about what the AMTS licensee has to do. They can just deny you permission to operate and not give a reason. They don't have to give a reason at all. They can just say no. They can just ignore your request and you can't operate. There's no recourse at all for any of this. And so we just proposed simply deleting those things and keeping in place, you know, the fixed. It also obviously disallows mobile operation because it's fixed. So we just simply propose keeping the power limits and keeping the restriction on digital and fixed stations. All that is fine. We were sort of thinking about, well, maybe this could be a band that people would use for like mesh networking stuff and kind of point-to-point digital things that were never really imagined in the 90s when this was done. Well, they might have been imagined, but they weren't in common use. And try and use it for that. And so in keeping with the spirit of them just saying, hey, what should we delete? We proposed only deletions. And Michelle had talked to ARRL throughout this process. ARRL did not include anything about 219 in their comments, but they were generally supportive of efforts to increase amateur access to this band. But yeah, it's a strange one. So I just talked a lot. Do you guys have any questions?
I have a couple of questions that you may or may not be able to answer because I don't know how deep into this you got. But I was trying to figure out, I guess, from the history you gave, if there are any actual AMTS licensees at this point.
So there are licensees that hold AMTS licenses, but there are no stations in the automated maritime telecommunications system because it never got off the ground. It was never really done. And so that basically that's the other thing is all of the discussion, if you go back and read about the interference characteristics of amateur stations, are all in the context of like coast and maritime stations. Almost none of the uses today are on the coast or maritime related in any way. Like I said, pretty much all of them are like positive train control by railroads. And it's the regulatory environment and the usage of it is completely different than when this was first kind of put forth. And so for us, this is a good reason to go and revisit these regulations because they've sort of been overtaken by events at this point.
Yeah, but the thing of it is that I think the FCC created a huge mess here by allowing the AMTS licensees to sublet the spectrum to non-maritime operators. I mean, I think that's kind of crazy. Yeah. But the other thing that popped into my head, and I don't know if this is an even answerable question, but do we even care about this 1 megacycle of spectrum?
Yeah, so I mean, potentially not. That's definitely a valid question. We frankly don't use 222 to 225 to anywhere close to its fullest extent, and so that's certainly valid. I guess it's one of those things that kind of got in my head, and the same for a few of us, and we decided, well, maybe we should try to do something. I think in just to be completely straight with you, I think the most likely outcome is that the FCC does nothing in regards to 219. It's very hard to get them to they just have a lot of stuff that they have to do, and there's a lot bigger interests behind other things that they care about, like clearing spectrum for 5G, and frankly, I don't fault them for that. It's that's a thing that more of the average citizens care about, and so I get why they spend more time doing that. That's not a knock on the FCC. It's so yeah, by far the most likely outcome is we're stuck still with this ban that is on the books that we can't really use, and some people also brought up if you kind of shake the tree on this, they might just come back and say, this is too much effort, we'll just delete the amateur secondary allocation, to which my response is, you can't use it right now anyway. So worst case, really the worst case is they do nothing. Because then you've got the stuff in the books, and then frankly, if they just remove our secondary allocation, well, that's stuff that cleans up Part 97 a little bit and removes some of this other stuff in there. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on that, but it's a very valid point, and I guess it's I think that in some ways, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but I kind of got nerd sniped for this, where I got into it and realized that it was this interesting sort of backwater, and I just wanted to do something about it for improving access, but really to just because I found it interesting. So
yeah, I have to say that normally topics regarding like frequency allocations and stuff like that are pretty boring, honestly. But I mean, this is actually really interesting, and it's particularly interesting because the upshot of it is probably going to be nothing will come of it. But it's still kind of an interesting band, and we will have links to all that stuff, including Michelle's talk and all that, in the show notes if people want to check that out, which I will be doing because I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, it's a great talk. Yeah, she's a very talented speaker and is even more plugged into this kind of thing than I am. So
I did the one other thing popped into my head while you were just talking a second ago, and that was the fact that over the many years that I've been an amateur radio operator, we have heard, or I have heard, and we have talked about on this show a few times about the ARRL and amateurs in general just being concerned as a group about the general loss of spectrum, because we don't seem to ever get anything back and stuff just seems to disappear. So on one level, I can certainly understand, this is only 219 to 220. It's a band we can't use. We might be able to use if they choose to do something about it, but just thinking about it even in terms of maybe the tiniest of wins might be something to keep people interested in trying to keep the amateur radio spectrum we have. Whether or not we'll see any more spectrum going forward, I assume we won't. There's just too many people interested in radio spectrum. But it is interesting from that perspective to try and keep our losses down, I guess, as an amateur radio community in the face of much bigger interests, as you said.
Yeah, yep, that was definitely something I was thinking about in this. As much as I just found it interesting, it's always good to get some wins, and I think, and people are talking about that a lot, and in many ways, when you look back at the history, which I started doing of how we get allocations, at least in the U.S. and really abroad, because a lot of this stuff is done by treaty and through the ITU and everything, and so and countries will go back and make their laws based on those like world radio conferences and things. But in general, as amateurs, I think it's important that we make peace with the idea that we're given these bands because they're deemed not useful for commercialization. And historically, as soon as they are, we lose them. And so this is happening now with all the bands like around 1 to 10 gigahertz that are becoming used for 5G. We've already lost some spectrum in there, and you don't hear a ton about it because it's difficult to get on the air with that as an amateur anyway. But that's kind of the way it's always been done. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't get more spectrum. I'm always an advocate for more amateur spectrum, but that's just sort of the way things are. And I think the more people kind of make peace with that, the better it is. I do think there's an opportunity to start to get spectrum that is no longer heavily used. For example, I'm forgetting her name now, but there's someone that this wasn't an ORI thing, but several years ago proposed an allocation of an 8-meter band for amateur radio, and that would be around I think 40 megahertz, around there. So in between the 10 and 6-meter bands. And that was mostly federal users, and a lot of public service used to use low band VHF like that. And most all of them are on 800 megahertz now. And so that band is, I think, relatively open and little used. And so that notice of proposed rulemaking is still kind of open, and the FCC hasn't done anything on it. But that's an example of the kind of thing where we can start to pick up spectrum and experiment with it. And I think the propagation characteristics of that are very interesting. So that's another example of things I found as I started looking into this. And I saw, looks like Darren mentioned in the chat that, yeah, the 220 in general is only really a region 2 thing. So the region that the US is in. And so because most other parts of the world don't have that allocated, which is part of the reason why getting radios to work on it is such a struggle, because you can only really sell to region 2. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, this is fascinating. But before we sort of wrap this up, Bill, do you have anything come to mind after hearing this discussion?
Yeah, I was kind of going down the rabbit hole of looking at that positive train control stuff, and I see that it's managed by a consortium, like you mentioned. PTC 220 is the consortium that holds that, and they say they have FCC call signs in the 219, 220, and 221 bands, which is also interesting because that means they're within that spectrum as well.
So they have actually bought a bunch. They have subleased a bunch of the AMTS spectrum. That's how they have that.
Okay.
So they're one of the largest. They've slowly been acquiring a lot of AMTS licenses by leasing them from people that had them over the last few years, and they have an almost nationwide coverage now. Like I said, the only other thing that I've seen, like looking at ULS for who has these licenses, which is a bit of a rabbit hole in and of itself, it's mostly either positive train control for railroads, or there's like some utilities using it for SCADA, like telemetry stuff, like public utilities and co-ops and things. But yeah, so those are the two people basically leasing these AMTS licenses. So, yep, that's why you see that. But yes, PTC 220 is all over the place.
Yeah, that's be a hard fighting against the railroad if they started saying that no, you're not putting stations out in the middle of the country where we have BNSF and everybody else running rail across there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they have this other requirement where they have to notify before they've actually done this notification that they have to do in Part 80, where they have to notify local TV stations that are like, I think it's channel 11 and 13. The FCC was very concerned about interference with TV reception. And so they have to notify
anywhere due to everybody going digital on TV. Most of that stuff moved way up the band, so.
That's right. So what's interesting is the American Association of Railroads, which I was unaware of that organization, but it makes sense that they have a trade organization, filed in this delete and said, hey, FCC, could you please delete our notification requirements to these TV stations, right, for AMTS spectrum? And they specifically asked for that, and they basically said, because of digital and the fact that a bunch of various things, we shouldn't have to do this, and because they have to submit like fairly detailed propagation studies and stuff to these TV stations. It's fairly onerous. So in our reply comments after I read that, we basically said, because one of the things the AAR said was, well, most of our deployments of positive train control are in railway right-of-ways, and they're away from residential areas. And so, we're very unlikely to interfere with people's reception of television. And I saw that and I thought to myself, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so basically said, hey, the AAR said most of our deployments are away from residential areas. And so I think that would probably reduce interference with ham stations using 219 as well. So that was in our reply comments, and so I thought that, sort of allying ourselves with interests like that, I actually think that the railroad use of this would not be a major hindrance to ham use of it. But anyway, that would remain to be seen. So that's basically the one area I think where we could get action on this, is if they decide they want to do something to help out the railroad's use of positive train control and start to delete some of their notification requirements. We might be able to kind of ride the coattails, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
All right. Yeah, well, I don't have anything else on this. I definitely going to go check out the presentation by Michelle and see and sort of go a little further down this rabbit hole. But I got to tell you, when I put the notes down for what this episode was going to be, this is not what I thought it was going to be. But I am pleasantly surprised with what it actually was. And Darren said if dedicated transmitters are prohibitive, what about transverters? I don't even know if you can speak to that.
They're not prohibited. People just don't really make them because there's not much of a market. And yes, so we started to look into potentially using transverters, or now I think most likely if we got action on this ban, we'd try to use some kind of SDR that made it easier to transmit, and then an amplifier for that is probably the easiest thing, because even if we're 100% successful and ham use of this ban is open up, it's always going to be niche. And so I don't really see manufacturers making like 219 to 220 data radios. So
yeah, doesn't seem like a good marketable thing. Yeah.
No, terrible business decision.
It might be useful in, as you said before, though, like the mesh networking area, something like that might be a great use for 219. But
yeah, that's what we see. That's kind of what we see its use as.
All right, very good. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up and let you get on with the rest of your evening. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. That's way more interesting than I thought this was going to be. So, not to say that I didn't think it was going to be interesting, but it's like 10 times what I thought. And the history was fantastic. So I'm going to definitely check out more about that. But is there anything else that we might not have touched on that you want to wrap up with? Anything about you, the ORI, the 219, or the rulemaking or anything?
No, I think you'll probably put some of the links in the show notes. If anybody's interested in ORI's work, it's at openresearch.institute. So you can go there, and it has all of the information about that, including some of the stuff about 219. But no, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm glad you found it interesting. I was a little bit concerned that maybe people wouldn't, because this is an extremely niche issue. But I hope I maybe pique some people's interest.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I find it, anything about the hobby is particularly interesting. And even if it doesn't directly affect me, some of the weirdness about government organizations and oversight and rulemaking and things like that, and just how spectrum works and the hobby evolves and all that kind of thing can be fascinating, even if it doesn't, necessarily affect you day to day. So, but yeah, thanks, Justin. I really appreciate you coming on. And, if there's any more about this, maybe if we get some 219 to 220 allocation, we'll revisit. But otherwise, just check out the links in the show notes for anybody listening. And you can go down that rabbit hole with the rest of us, even if you're not in Region 2. But with that, we'll let you go on with your evening. And really appreciate you being here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Russ.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, very good. Well, that does bring us down to the end of the show. So I got to get back here to segment 2, which is announcements and feedback. And, this was our feedback.
It's like a feedback episode.
Yeah, the feedback episode. We went into it at length, a deep dive on feedback. So there you go. But anyway, we do implore you to help out the show if you can, using Patreon, PayPal, buying some merchandise, or subscribing over on YouTube. There's even some new content over on YouTube. Bill has been putting stuff over there. And if I ever get some free time, I might do the same. But with that, we'll let Bill, since he didn't talk very much on the show tonight, go down through the new subscribers and so on and so forth, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this one up.
Absolutely. We have a new subscriber on Patreon, Jeffrey Cannell. Thank you and welcome. Over on Twitter, we had What's Up with Six join us, and at Round Noon. Over on Discord, we've had quite a few join. Ralph, KC3VII. K4HNV Theory,
F.
Jerry, what?
F4.
Oh, Fox 4. Sorry, Fox 4. F4HNV theory. Jerry, KK7CC, Mugiwari, Anomaly Undefined, and Amphigori joined us there. On Instagram, we had Edgar CCS 2020. On Mastodon, we had at Alex and at JDL Tuna. Over on Blue Sky, we had Ralph, Delta Lima 1, Echo Lima, and JDL Tuna. No merchandise sales or mailing list additions. And on the live chat this evening, we had William, K6WHM, Darren, VK6EK, Mike, K6GTE, Steve, KJ5T, Tony, K4XSS, and of course, our guest, Adam, K3CAN. Or no, not Adam, sorry. I saw the 3 instantly. I was thinking the guest. No, Adam, K3CAN. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, and our guest, Justin, AB3E. So, yeah, we'll make sure to get that in there. All right, with that, thanks, everybody, for checking out the show. We really appreciate it. And this was a fascinating episode. A little bit about the ORI, a little bit about the FCC, a little bit about 219 megahertz, and a lot about trains and boats and stuff. So, anyway, thanks for listening.
It's an automobile, right?
Exactly. Have a great week. Hope you'll tune in next time for our Short Topics episode. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode number 582 of Linux in the Ham Shack. And for the on assignment, Cheryl W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD 73.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a community-sponsored podcast. Live recordings are Sunday nights at 8 o'clock Central Time. Our homepage can be found at lhspodcast.info. You can support the podcast via Patreon at patreon.com/LHS podcast. We're also on Discord, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Mastodon. Contact us via email at info@lhspodcast.info or via voicemail at 190954777469. That's 1909 LHS show. We also have merch. So until next we meet, remember to always heed your hedonism.